Those officers, one after another, have gradually come forward to say what they truly saw. You will listen to one of them today describing a download of what appeared to him to be binary code into his mind when he touched the gleaming black surface of this object after walking up to it in that forest all those years ago. Subsequently, he has been able to recall some of that binary code, and in this program, Linda Moulton Howe will describe efforts to understand its meaning and what has come from those efforts, and the results are very surprising and suggestive of an origin for our visitors very different from what we might have expected. Also this week, the weather has continued to swathe the northeastern United States, as I have been predicting for some months, with storm after storm after storm. What has happened is that a so-called blocking high has developed over the Greenland ice sheet. The reason is that Greenland is quite literally melting. The jet stream goes all the way south into the central United States, then loops north a couple of 1,000 miles around northern Greenland, and then swoops south again into Central Europe. On both sides of this enormous loop, weather systems are going to be continuing to be very wet and very wintry. Arctic air is being driven down from all the way from the northern Arctic and the area of the North Pole in Canada into the central latitudes. That air should be hanging above Greenland, and the jet stream should be flowing much farther south than it is. Last summer saw the most extensive reduction in polar ice in recorded history. We had a tremendous meltback of polar ice, and the result of this is that warmer waters around Greenland have caused this challenge to the Greenland ice sheet. What does all of this mean? Well, among other things, it means that Greenland is melting faster than we expected, and it opens up the door to more violent weather in the spring as warm air begins to come up from the south, colliding with the cold air that will be hanging over the central latitudes. At the same time, we can expect an extraordinarily hot summer to follow this past winter, a summer quite similar to last summer unless we're very lucky and something unexpected happens. Nobody really understands at this time where we are with the climate. The climate has spun far from where climate change models expected it to be, so what we can expect is, in fact, more of the unexpected. However, I would be keeping a weather eye out if I lived in Central Europe or anywhere across the United States, from the Dakotas all the way east into New York and up into New England. I would be keeping a weather eye out this spring and summer, because there could be some very, very intense weather. As this is being recorded on Saturday, January the 30th, William Henry remains in Egypt. Last word from him about 15 hours ago. He was in the hotel with his group, and they were perfectly fine. I believe they are expecting to travel today, and we are hoping that when their plane lands, if their plane indeed takes off, they will be on it and they will be fine. But do keep William Henry and his group in your heart, as well as all of the people of Egypt during this extraordinary time in that country. We'll be right back with Linda Moulton Howe.
Dreamland subscribers, don't miss the live chat with Whitley and Ann Strieber in the Unknown Country chat rooms Wednesday at 7 p.m. Pacific Time.
I'm happy to say we'll be back this coming Wednesday, so do join us in the chat room, 7 p.m. Pacific Time this Wednesday evening. We'll be looking for you. Over Christmas, Linda Moulton Howe got on an airplane and went over to the United Kingdom to observe the 30th anniversary of the Rendlesham Forest UFO event. Linda met with two of the principal witnesses, both retired Air Force personnel, James Peniston and John Burroughs, Airman First Class John Burroughs. Together, they went to Rendlesham Forest and relived the experiences that these men had there 30 years ago, and they will tell you in their own words what happened. But even more extraordinary is the code recalled by Peniston, which Linda has worked to find a translation of, and we'll hear about that too. It's absolutely amazing stuff. Linda Moulton Howe's website is earthfiles.com. Go to earthfiles.com every day for the best and most credible news at the edge of science and reality in the world today. That's earthfiles.com. And now here is earthfiles.com's Emmy Award-winning reporter and editor, Linda Moulton Howe.
Thank you, Whitley. And I am thinking, as listening to you do this introduction, that it was in 2008 that John Burroughs called me up for the first time in many years. I had known him before in other research, but he called me and said, Linda, I need your help. I can't sleep. I'm having nightmares. I have this compulsion, this feeling that I and Jim Peniston have to be back in Rendlesham Forest in December of 2010. Can you help us? And over the last 2+ years, Jim and John and I have talked about this a lot, and we're not sure if we were going to be physically on an airplane headed for England, as they seem to have this compelling feeling, both of them, in their dreams and in their consciousness. But it happened. And all three of us left different airports on December 23rd, and we met at Heathrow on December 24th. And on Christmas morning, December 25th, 2010, Jim, John, and I returned to Rendlesham Forest. It was their first time together in that forest for 30 years, since December 26, 1980, when they encountered what Jim calls a craft of unknown origin, and John has tried to illustrate the bizarre red, orange, blue, white lights that he and others chased in that forest on different nights. And the one that has haunted Jim and John the most is 3 o'clock in the morning on December 26, 1980, when John was perhaps taken. That's what many other people at the base said later. John Burroughs jumped up on or was taken by something in the sky that was glowing, and Jim Peniston insists that he put his hands on these raised symbols like Braille on the side of a black glassy craft shaped like a triangle on the floor of Rendlesham Forest, and set off what he thinks now is a binary code. Well, we set off that morning, driving past the East Gate, and during that day we ended up at what is called the historic Colonel Halt site that has been used in television shows periodically over the last 30 years. But in the daytime, John stood there looking out, and he kept saying, "This is not right. I know this is not right." And we walked around in the forest during the day, and we went back out at night, and now the conditions are as both of them remembered 30 years before, and John Burroughs was even more convinced this is not right. And what it was that was bothering him is that as we stood in this site that has been there historically marked by a picnic bench for years, we could see low on the horizon, so tiny that you had to really look for it, was the Orford Lighthouse. Tiny, tiny pinpoint of light only every 6 seconds as the beacon rotates every 6 seconds. Not at all what John and Jim encountered or others encountered in Rendlesham 30 years ago, but it was sparking a memory in John Burroughs' mind. This is not right. We came into a small field. We came past a farm that had animals, and it was only when we passed the farmhouse that we could ever see the tiny Orford Lighthouse. What is wrong here? So the next day, we moved further south. We began searching on a different road from John and Jim's inspiration of studying computers. And then, as we began to walk in a part of the Rendlesham Forest directly west of Capel Green, the famous Capel Green and other people's testimony. This is when John and Jim both felt that they were beginning to be in the area that they had been 30 years ago. And we took a tri-field magnetic and microwave measuring meter into the field with us. And we found it pegging. When John was present with Jim, it was pegging at a finger of trees that come out into this huge farmer's field directly across from this section of Rendlesham Forest, and the finger of trees forms the northern boundary of Capel Green. And this is where we are, at the edge of the forest, looking out onto Capel Green and this finger of trees, as we pick up now with John Burroughs, and then we will also hear from Jim Peniston.
The first night, Jim felt like a real strong energy field. I definitely felt some kind of energy on me, like it felt like it was going up my neck and stuff. But the meter itself pegged out. It didn't move. It was staying strong right in that whole area where the water was. And
in fact, the needle was as high as it would go and did not drop.
Right, it wouldn't drop. It was like it was banging, wanted to go further, and it couldn't go any further, yes.
The next day, we are in the tall trees of Rendlesham Forest. Right along that edge, there's Capel Green and a bit of the farmer's field, and then you are in Rendlesham, and that's where we were when Jim seemed to be overcome by a feeling, this is where we were, John. What is it that you felt happened?
Well, when Jim walked away with you to the trees, and then motioned for me to come over, and then he showed me where the berms were, and then he said, I remember tripping here, then I went forward, and then it was like he went into a trance. He started acting like he was reliving it from 30 years before, and he acted like he was walking around it. He was acting like it was there, and he was seeing it, and then he acted like he touched it, and then it almost appeared to me like his whole body shook.
Out in the forest, Jim Peniston said his recall was so strong at that moment in front of us on December 27th, 2010, that he could see, hear, and feel what happened there 30 years ago. Here now is what he told me.
We were like within 10 or 15 feet of the craft. When I approached the craft, the physical air and surroundings changed. It was like as if a bubble was around the area that measured maybe 10 or 15 feet out from this craft. Once entered that area, different sensations happened, deadening of sound.
Your skin and your hair were affected?
Skin and hair, there was like a feeling of electricity on my clothes, too. Then it seemed like everything ran to slow motion. The recall was so strong, as I walk up to it, the fabric of the craft, when I'm touching it, is very smooth. It looks like black glass. Symbols are running 3 feet long, maybe a foot or so high. Then I started touching them, the feeling of sandpaper. So I traced with my hands each symbol just out of awe, not sure what I'm seeing. On the repeat of coming back of these symbols, I get a bright light, and I can't see. And I have no other vision, and I can't see what's going on around me. I just see these symbols. They start running in front of me, and they're fast. They're coming at me fast.
The pattern that is on that black glassy surface, you have run your hands over all of them, and something now starts putting something in your mind?
Yes, by touching them, I activate a technology that is able to let me see ones and zeros and things like that.
Binary code.
Later to find out that's exactly what it is. At the time, I'm just having flashes of ones and zeros and zeros and ones.
And are you seeing the zeros and ones like they are in the air in front of you?
I run my hands over each of them, tracing them. That's when the activation happened. That was startling and very strange. It was scary. It was a very scary moment. You have no control what's going on.
Were you seeing the zeros and ones in the air in front of you?
No, they're in my head. I cannot see nothing except those symbols.
the technology has somehow taken over the synapses in your brain in order to place these vivid zeros and ones.
They overrode my vision and everything, yes.
And then what happens?
Seemed like it was given to me very fast. Then I got the bright light again, and that's when the coding stopped. I go back home and I finally get about 4 or 5 hours of sleep. But I'm awakened, because I just can't get the symbols out of my head. Almost like you're going crazy. I mean, I know I had a shock. I know it was trauma. I'm wondering, am I okay? Why would I have these rushing through my head like this?
The zeros and ones.
Oh, yeah, it was just unmanageable. It really was.
In your head, were you seeing color?
No, they were black and white. I grabbed my notebook again because I wanted to look at the symbols that I recorded.
And you mean that panel about 3 feet long and about 1.5 feet high on the glassy surface that were triangles and circles in those odd patterns?
Right, and I had recorded them on my notebook, and I was just going back looking at the next day, and I still have these ones and zeros in my head. I mean, it's just like it keeps repeating. So I said, well, I could write those down. Maybe it'll help to write them down. And so I just flipped the pages open, and I started writing more in the notebook, and all of a sudden they stop. I don't have any more. I don't have any more symbols in my head. So they stop. I go, it's that easy? Just write them down. They were gone. I didn't have to worry about the symbols rushing to my head anymore. They were just gone.
As John and I watched Jim moving and talking in the Rendlesham trees, John suddenly thought he saw some kind of energy around Jim, and then it was gone.
And then at that point, I had a weird feeling that the whole energy source was gone. It was like there was clearly a source in the field, there was clearly an energy source there, and then I just felt like it was gone. And I made a comment right afterwards, the energy source, I think, is gone. And then that night, Winston went back out in the field, and it was gone.
And the next morning, what did he tell you?
When I saw him in the morning, he was totally shocked, and he couldn't believe that there was no energy force.
Winston checked it with the same tri-field meter that on the night of the 26th that we got the pegging. And now suddenly, after midnight on the 27th, he walked all around that finger of trees, and he could not get any high reading anywhere on that tri-field meter.
Right. No, he couldn't get any readings. And one thing that I said earlier to him out there, I said I felt it move back towards the coast.
And I was running his IR camera on the night of December 27th so that I would have infrared video record of you walking with Winston out past Capel Green to the finger of trees, and that you had the tri-field meter that whole time. When you came back, I remember distinctly that you said it looked like I saw a blue light in the trees.
Right. It clearly looked like, for brief seconds, that you could see like almost a little blue something floating along into the finger area and even starting to go on into the field, yes. There's an energy source out there. I'm not telling you it's ET or what it is, but there clearly is some kind of blue-type energy picked up on camera. What that means, I'm not sure, but there's no doubt in my mind there's some kind of energy field or source out there in that field, in that area.
When you were walking with Winston around the far western point of that finger of trees on the north boundary of Capel Green, as you walk around those trees, you enter that huge field.
Right. What's interesting to me is that energy field's still there.
After all these years.
After all these years.
But why would it go away on the third day and night?
I honestly don't know. I mean, it could be coincidence that I just felt it, and it could have been farther back by the house. It could be a shifting field. I really can't explain why I got that feeling other than just the way Jim was acting and just the feeling I got afterwards. But I can tell you this, I believe it's still there. I just believe it moved back further, and I believe if you went back out there and looked, you could find an energy field still out there somewhere in that area.
Now, there has been a lot of interest and controversy about the 5 scan pages of zeros and ones that Jim never mentioned in 30 years until we were filming for Ancient Aliens in Phoenix on October 2nd of 2010. And you were shocked, I was shocked, when Jim said, I remember writing down zeros and ones. What was especially interesting to me was to go back to his 1994 hypnosis session and realize that he mentioned the intelligence people who were putting him under sodium pentothal hypnosis sometime after December 26, 1980. They asked him, as if they already had some other knowledge, they asked Jim Peniston about binary code. But over the 30 years, Jim never said that he wrote down zeros and ones. What was your reaction to the 5 scan pages that he's provided?
Jim never approached me and said he had written anything down. The only time Jim talked anything about having any problems, our incident happened on Thursday night and the Friday morning. Then Friday night, they had another incident in the Saturday. Then I was back out there on Saturday night with Colonel Howe on Sunday morning.
December 28, 1980.
Right, December 28th. On that Sunday evening, on our last day of break, and Jim had been gone, I went down to his house to tell him what had happened on that Saturday night with Colonel Hall, to tell him you wouldn't believe that more stuff had happened. He just seemed shook up. He just said that he was having feelings coming to him and things that he couldn't understand, and it was bothering him, and it was the kind of things that he didn't feel comfortable with because it just wasn't normal. That much I remember, but at no time did anything come up with I'm writing down zeros and ones or anything like that.
Did you and Jim Peniston ever get together after Sunday night, December 28, 1980, to discuss what had happened to you in Rendlesham Forest on December 26, 1980?
Other than when we got called in, when we returned back to duty and had to write statements and turn them in, other than that, we didn't talk about it. It was making him very nervous and upset because what he was feeling wasn't something that he could explain or understand. And that's as far as Jim had ever mentioned or talked to me about anything that could relate possibly to the codes, other than on that day when we were filming, and I saw in his notebook the zeros and ones. And I'm going to be honest, I had no idea. I've heard of binary codes as far as I understood they had something to do with computers and computer programming, but I honestly didn't know anything more about it. So I was completely taken aback that the fact that he written something down, number one, and number two, I honestly didn't understand how important it was as far as what could come out of it. I understood that he had clearly written something down, but as far as what it meant, I had no idea at that point. I do feel that there is a meaning to these codes, that I'm going to take a hard look at these different locations.
The one that Dr. Drew and Dr. Reed think is most logical is the one that seems to be very close to the center of Woodbridge. Some people have even suggested that if you all were dealing with some other intelligence in some kind of a probe or craft, it may have been a signal that Jim picked up that related to where it was, near Woodbridge, England.
The thing to me that's important now is to identify what the energy source is, to see if there's anything else out there in these coordinates that mean anything, to maybe go to something to see if there's an energy source there. I understand everybody wants to speculate on could it have been contact, and I'm not against any of that. But what's important to me is to see if there's anything that's important within these 24 locations, not speculate on which one's the most important, not worry about is it ET or what else it could be.
And Whitley, the 24 locations that John Burroughs is referring to are the potential locations from a stream of binary code written in Jim Peniston's logbook 30 years ago in the back pages, a string of zeros and ones, which none of us saw or knew anything about until October 2nd of 2010. And then I took the scans that Jim sent me of those pages and sent them to a retired astronomer, Mike Reed, in North Carolina, who has worked with me a lot on crop formations, and a Dr. Horace Drew in Australia. He is a retired geneticist who also is extremely interested in geometries and math in crop formations and any of the other work that I am doing. And when they ran through the zeros and ones, they found that there was a 1 inside of a 0, confusing the issue of how should it be interpreted as a 0 or a 1. And we're talking about ASCII code that has been used in computers since IBM developed it many years ago. And in ASCII, there have been an evolution from when IBM started. They had 4 bits or 4, whether it was a 0 or 1 or all 4 zeros and 4 ones, it doesn't matter. It's a pattern. And that the pattern of those zeros and ones, there is a chart that shows you what letter of the English alphabet and what number 1 through 9 or 0 it is. And 4-bit was IBM long ago. Then it went to 7-bit, what is called 7 bits. It would take 7 zeros and ones to make an alphabet letter or a number. And then in 1986, it was changed to 8-bit. When Dr. Reed and Dr. Drew started looking at this just string of zeros and ones, they came up with some very interesting words: exploration, humanity, and a string of numbers that had an N in it and what could be interpreted as a W or as another character, depending on how you interpreted that 1 and the 0. And it was Dr. Reed, the astronomer, who said to us, I think we're dealing with a latitude-longitude here. And as I have reported now in several reports at earthfiles.com, we are now at a point where we have as much as we're going to get out of those 5 scan pages, having used a filter code, and that everyone who has handled the binary string says there were no instructions in Jim's zeros and ones about where a decimal point should go. Without knowing where the decimal point should go, and you've got latitudes with the possibility of west longitudes and east longitudes, you put that all together and you have 24 possible options moving the decimal point, since we don't know where it should be. And finally, out of those 24 options, of which many are in oceans, many are in very remote places, there is one that stood out, and Dr. Reed and Dr. Drew both sent me a summary saying this is what they think this latitude-longitude is trying to focus on, and it was at the center of Woodbridge, Suffolk, England. And that ties into my discussion at the end of my interview with John, that many people have speculated if this was, in fact, some kind of a craft of unknown origin, perhaps even a time machine that has come up in Jim Peniston's 1994 hypnosis. It may have been sending out latitude-longitude coordinates the entire time it was interacting in Rendlesham Forest, because that would be logical in this entire cosmos, that every planet, every sun, every life form that would move throughout the cosmos would be relating to spheres and how to grid and measure spheres, and latitudes and longitudes on the Earth would be part of such a mathematical grid system, and sending out a beacon that would always be saying, this is where we are, meaning whatever that was inside of that black triangle in Rendlesham Forest. That may be why that latitude-longitude appears to focus on Woodbridge. We have a lot more work to do on all of these 24 options, and Jim Peniston and John Burroughs and I are going to keep, step by step, trying to understand more deeply what happened in Rendlesham Forest, December 26 to 28, 1980, that haunts them and everybody who was with them to this day.
Well, Linda, Woodbridge, it's not far from Rendlesham Forest. Is there any crop formation activity in that area?
No,
I don't think so.
No, there has never been to my knowledge, but it is only 5 miles plus a little bit to the Orford coast. And that area, the Orford coast, in that big ocean out there, if you take and go Orford and go north, it is one of the more active areas in England where people have been reporting for years unusual and unidentified lights and craft. And it is so interesting that John Burroughs, who, the more I have spent time with Jim and John, the more I have come to respect that these are two men who are highly, highly intuitive. That when John Burroughs in the forest, I heard it, I saw him. The energy has gone. He is the kind of person who's almost embarrassed to say that, but nevertheless, the tri-field meter confirmed that the energy is gone. And
these are both retired military guys.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And John, his arm swung out straight east, and he said, I don't know why. I have the feeling the energy has gone to the coast. Now, when you realize that these two men have been struggling with nightmares and dreams, and in Jim's case, zeros and ones that drove him nearly crazy in his head till he sat down and wrote them out on a notebook and never told anyone for 30 years.
Shades of Richard Dreyfuss. Close encounters.
Exactly. Whitley, yeah, that's exactly the mashed potatoes, Devil's Tower. And where this is headed is that these two men who have lived lives very much of a military nature, they are both now in their lives, perhaps because of why they or what they were touched by in Rendlesham. They are extremely intuitive, and they personally, the two of them, feel that something profound is yet to be learned from their minds and their experiences in Rendlesham that will apply to a future upcoming.
They're precognitive, aren't they?
There is that feeling of precognition when you are around both of them, that is for sure.
Like as if, people when they are exposed to something extraordinary, often it changes them in amazing ways. And if I wonder if someone was exposed to a time machine, that it might make them quite precognitive.
Yes.
Annie, my wife, always thinks that this essentially comes down to some kind of a communication or a journey backward from the future. And perhaps that's exactly what it is. And perhaps the reason Woodbridge seems like a rather unimportant little corner of the world to us is that in the future it isn't.
And the energy, we felt it on our backs, our necks, our head. We walked the field with the tri-field meter, and it was pinging and pegging, and there was energy in that field.
Now, what exactly is a tri-field meter?
That is what we use in crop circles and other places to measure for microwave and magnetic fields. And when it was pegging as far as it could go in the magnetic field registration. That means that there was some sort of a magnetic disturbance in that big farm field, and where we were at Capel Green and walking around that finger of trees, which, by the way, answered one of the mysteries of 30 years to both these men. Why did they get wet? They could not remember why they both. In hypnosis, they remembered getting wet. Consciously, they remembered getting wet. They've never understood. And when we went following the tri-field meter in the field where it pegged at the corner, the western tip of that finger of trees extending into the farm field, you walk up to the trees and there is water. I took photographs of it. We videotaped it. You would never know until you walked to the trees. The trees there are full of water in a marshy bog. That suddenly the first place and only place we found would explain exactly where they came out of Rendlesham Forest, where Jim went back in time, where we walked a short distance in the field to what would be the Capel Green and that finger of trees. There is the water, and there is a third farmhouse with all the animals, and everything suddenly, it made sense that we've got the location, we understand the water, we know that they had their encounter with the black glassy object in the tall trees, what would be the edge of the Capel Green area going west, and then they're chasing out the lights. They're still chasing the lights after their encounter in the tall trees. And Jim falls. He remembered, John remembers that they had trouble when you are there at the edge of the tall trees growing onto that farm, there are wire fences. We had to climb over the wire fences in December of 2010, and 30 years ago, Jim Peniston remembered falling over one of the wire fences, John reaching down with his right arm and pulling Jim Peniston up. John is 6 feet 6.5 inches tall. He's a big person. So he picked up Jim, and they kept on running, and they both remember they were running for their lives after the light that was moving backwards in the field. And when you're there and you retrace it and you're following their minds as they're remembering, it all suddenly makes sense. So we discovered a lot, but now we're left with an even bigger mystery. Jim's hypnosis in 1994, it came out that they got communication. They were time travelers from 40,000 years in the future, coming back to our present to gather genetic material to use as Band-Aids in this far distant future in order to survive a DNA problem and catastrophe, annihilation, if they can't figure out a way to genetically improve or change whatever the problem is. And that the black machine would have been something like a time machine without organic life in it. This was a programmed droid, if you want to put it that way, a time-traveling droid that settled down and interacted with Jim Peniston. Well, in the future, our future, these lives now, these two men think that whatever time travelers, whatever sent that black glassy probe into Rendlesham Forest, will somehow return, at least to them.
You know, I wonder if this happens so much during this time because of the fact that this is the last time when there are good genes available, that something happens quite soon now that disturbs the genetic content of our species and all of Earth's species. And I think to myself about all of these strange cases of animals dying. And just day before yesterday, a couple of weeks ago, just recently, 5 miles of beaches in Portugal were covered with dead octopus.
Okay, let me correct this. I learned today, to my red-faced embarrassment, and you can edit this out or whatever you want to do, it was sent, that whole story was sent to me in a list of January 2011 to Earth die-offs. And I selected that one and featured it because it was unprecedented. It's true. It is unprecedented. There has never been thousands of octopus die in a beach. But it's a January 2010 story highlighting the problem that every single one of us who works in our lives on the net, if you don't double and triple check dates on every single thing that comes to you, you will end up where I and others, we in good faith took it as a January 2011 story, and I don't remember hearing anything about it a year ago. Most people that I've talked to said they didn't hear about this a year ago. But it is a January 2010 story, and Whitley, it still doesn't have an answer. There's been nothing reported about what happened to all of those octopus on the Portugal, northern beach of Portugal a year ago, almost exactly a year ago. And so in an odd way, even though it is a date mistake, it brought home that we're thinking that the new year of 2011 has been extraordinary, and has been. But thousands of octopus died for reasons unknown in northern Portugal a year ago.
Now, here's something interesting, though. The BBC is reporting this is having happened last week.
Well, it's a BBC, the BBC story was sent around as a January 2011, and it is actually 2010. That's where it all began. It is you'd like to pound on the people who do this. If it was innocent, it just means that all of us who are trying to report facts, we have to be so careful of things that are distributed on the net under the wrong date. And that's what happened. But it doesn't take away from the fact that this was unprecedented, not in the history of human science. There's not a single other precedent case of thousands of octopus dying on a beach. Never had happened before. And will it happen again this year or next year? Are we exactly at the turning point as you have just so intelligently described? What if? The importance of 2012 is because this is the tiny, narrow last door of healthy genes on Earth.
Gosh, Linda, I just worry so for the children, the beautiful young people of this world. If this is what we've given them, I will feel a deep, deep, deep shame. Listen, all I can say is that this is a really fascinatingly strange report. The Rendlesham Forest case never ends, and I think back on Philip Klass's material about it and how much he made of that lighthouse and how great the effort was to spread the lie about it and how generally that lie was believed, except by the people who were actually there.
Exactly. And when you do go there and you stand on the highest ground, the first night we're on the highest ground, it's the highest ground that you can see that Orford Lighthouse, and Whitley, it is the tiniest needle point of light. If you did not look for it, you would not see it. And for anybody to now look at the facts and what has happened and say, how could anybody have gotten away with distributing misinformation about a lighthouse 30 years ago that would have stuck? It's because nobody has the money or the time to be able to go from the United States or other countries to Woodbridge, England. It is a long trip out of London. It is difficult. It's a lot of work to get through that forest. It was everything we could do to bring to bear to make this happen. And once we're there, it is just so preposterous. You say, if anybody had given any kind of objective coverage to all of what was being said versus the facts 30 years ago, 25 years ago, that would have disappeared. And governments get away with this kind of calculated misinformation because they know that 99.5% of the world public cannot or will not even do a reality check. They can't. Most people can't afford to travel to these places. So there is something to me satisfying to have stood there with my own eyes in the day and in the dark and watched this needle point, tiny light, once every 6 seconds, hardly there for 1/100th of a second, and then it's gone. How can governments get away with it? Because no one is able to do reality checks, apparently, and report it, but we have, and we will keep trying. And that's one of the huge values of Dreamland and Earth Files. We're at least trying to bring these investigations to the public that you're not going to hear about it anyplace else.
Linda Moulton Howe, thank you very much, as always, for a terrific report. Next week, Dreamland's resident prophet is back, John Howe, with his 2011 predictions. He's going to go beyond where he went on Coast a couple of weeks ago. He's got a group of predictions that are going to absolutely amaze you, give you hope, curl your hair, and curl your toes south again into Central Europe. On both sides of this enormous loop, weather systems are going to be continuing to be very wet and very wintry. Arctic air is being driven down from all the way from the northern Arctic and the area of the North Pole in Canada into the central latitudes. That air should be hanging above Greenland, and the jet stream should be flowing much farther south than it is. Last summer saw the most extensive reduction in polar ice in recorded history. We had a tremendous meltback of polar ice, and the result of this is that warmer waters around Greenland have caused this challenge to the Greenland ice sheet. What does all of this mean? Well, among other things, it means that Greenland is melting faster than we expected, and it opens up the door to more violent weather in the spring as warm air begins to come up from the south, colliding with the cold air that will be hanging over the central latitudes. At the same time, we can expect an extraordinarily hot summer to follow this past winter, a summer quite similar to last summer unless we're very lucky and something unexpected happens. Nobody really understands at this time where we are with the climate. The climate has spun far from where climate change models expected it to be, so what we can expect is, in fact, more of the unexpected. However, I would be keeping a weather eye out if I lived in Central Europe or anywhere across the United States, from the Dakotas all the way east into New York and up into New England. I would be keeping a weather eye out this spring and summer, because there could be some very, very intense weather. As this is being recorded on Saturday, January the 30th, William Henry remains in Egypt. Last word from him about 15 hours ago. He was in the hotel with his group, and they were perfectly fine. I believe they are expecting to travel today, and we are hoping that when their plane lands, if their plane indeed takes off, they will be on it and they will be fine. But do keep William Henry and his group in your heart, as well as all of the people of Egypt during this extraordinary time in that country. We'll be right back with Linda Moulton Howe.
Dreamland subscribers, don't miss the live chat with Whitley and Ann Strieber in the Unknown Country chat rooms Wednesday at 7 p.m. Pacific Time.
I'm happy to say we'll be back this coming Wednesday, so do join us in the chat room, 7 p.m. Pacific Time this Wednesday evening. We'll be looking for you. Over Christmas, Linda Moulton Howe got on an airplane and went over to the United Kingdom to observe the 30th anniversary of the Rendlesham Forest UFO event. Linda met with two of the principal witnesses, both retired Air Force personnel, James Peniston and John Burroughs, Airman First Class John Burroughs. Together, they went to Rendlesham Forest and relived the experiences that these men had there 30 years ago, and they will tell you in their own words what happened. But even more extraordinary is the code recalled by Peniston, which Linda has worked to find a translation of, and we'll hear about that too. It's absolutely amazing stuff. Linda Moulton Howe's website is earthfiles.com. Go to earthfiles.com every day for the best and most credible news at the edge of science and reality in the world today. That's earthfiles.com. And now here is earthfiles.com's Emmy Award-winning reporter and editor, Linda Moulton Howe.
Thank you, Whitley. And I am thinking, as listening to you do this introduction, that it was in 2008 that John Burroughs called me up for the first time in many years. I had known him.
Those officers, one after another, have gradually come forward to say what they truly saw. You will listen to one of them today describing a download of what appeared to him to be binary code into his mind when he touched the gleaming black surface of this object after walking up to it in that forest all those years ago. Subsequently, he has been able to recall some of that binary code, and in this program, Linda Moulton Howe will describe efforts to understand its meaning and what has come from those efforts, and the results are very surprising and suggestive of an origin for our visitors very different from what we might have expected. Also this week, the weather has continued to swat the northeastern United States, as I have been predicting for some months, with storm after storm after storm. What has happened is that a so-called blocking high has developed over the Greenland ice sheet. The reason is that Greenland is quite literally melting. The jet stream goes all the way south into the central United States, then loops north a couple of thousand miles around northern Greenland, and then swoops south.
Before in other research, but he called me and said, Linda, I need your help. I can't sleep. I'm having nightmares. I have this compulsion, this feeling that I and Jim Peniston have to be back in Rendlesham Forest in December of 2010. Can you help us? And over the last 2+ years, Jim and John and I have talked about this a lot, and we're not sure if we were going to be physically on an airplane headed for England, as they seem to have this compelling feeling, both of them, in their dreams and in their consciousness. But it happened. And all three of us left different airports on December 23rd, and we met at Heathrow on December 24th. And on Christmas morning, December 25th, 2010, Jim, John, and I returned to Rendlesham Forest. It was their first time together in that forest for 30 years, since December 26, 1980, when they encountered what Jim calls a craft of unknown origin, and John has tried to illustrate the bizarre red, orange,